Fantastic. So yeah, thank you so much for everyone who did fill in the feedback. It really helped to form tonight's session. And it was a lot. It was a lot of really awesome questions and particular scenarios or particular areas of interest. Where do I get more info on this? Or this happens a lot. What do I do? And so we've pulled out one that was probably the most common, and we'll be talking about that at the end, so you know what we're going to be doing in our third talk. So for tonight, we'll go through the challenges, some of the ones that were listed in the feedback, the solutions, so some of the education that you yourselves can take on and pass along to your athletes, some skills building to help buffer them, and then going through some scenarios, especially during these COVID times, and some common challenges that your athletes have. What could be your action plan of how to integrate some of these new skills into the way that you deliver your coaching practice and the way that you manage your programs? So that's where we're going to go, but we're going to start by just talking about duty of care. And for me, duty of care, we've always thought about caring for, and that duty that we have to care for all of our athletes, but thinking about duty of care, including their mental health and the protection and the guarding of that mental health as well. So what you can do to deliver on that duty of care, ways that our sport culture actually affects mental health in sometimes positive, sometimes negative ways, and then how you could maybe look at your approach and how you personally feel about mental health, and maybe some of the support or education you did or didn't have coming up as an athlete that we have the opportunity now in 2020, I think, to really build out. So I'm excited about that. We're going to begin with a bit of a quiz, and just to be fun and interactive, maybe you can put your answer in the chat. So with the first question, it's sport enhances mental skills and provides resiliency to life stressors. So just if you want to answer, put it in the chat window, go ahead and give me your answer to this. Got a couple brave souls in there. Did a couple. Well, here, and we got some, yeah, true, yes, 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 maybe, yes, absolutely, and a maybe. And so actually the most hesitant one, Jerry, it kind of is along the lines that of what I would give as my answer sometimes. So maybe, it depends. So it could be true, it depends. Sport can also promote maladaptive behaviors, and those take away from the healthy coping skills. So it's like really, really good sport, really healthy holistic development can really help provide that, but there are also environments that don't. Here's a second question. Thanks for everyone that answered. Athletes and coaches who are experiencing mental illness are more likely to seek help. What do you think about this one? Okay. I'm seeing a theme on the answers here. Right, and you're absolutely right. So false. We know from multiple studies, and this was actually part of the impetus to why we started up and developed the Canadian Centre for Mental Health in Sport, is that the literature tells us that coaches and athletes are less likely to seek help. And that's to do with, again, sport culture and our stoic nature and a whole host of things that we're going to talk about tonight. So we're going to talk about ways to break it down. Here's another one. Some sport cultures see a higher incidence of mental illness and mental health challenges. Got a couple answers in there. Looks pretty unanimous. You got it. It's true. There are several sports, and even within those sports, there might be some categories or cultures in them that are predisposed to adding to the risk of development of mental illnesses and mental health challenges. And then last question, sport leaders should be trained on ways to spot mental health challenges. What's your thought on this one? Love it. Loving your answers. Yes, so true. Just thinking of it like any other injury, really, right? If there were physical symptoms of injury or illness, these are things that we're trained for, and mental health has always kind of been left off the docket. And I found in recent years, it's been amazing to see that this has started to be added to the repertoire of coach education and skills that we're now talking about, which is very exciting for me. And one thing that I like to show my athletes and coaches is I like to show them that, someone can have a mental health condition and still have well-being. So you've got an athlete that's been diagnosed, for example, with obsessive compulsive disorder, or perhaps a mood disorder or depression. If they are being treated and have some strategies and have actually taken steps towards a diagnosis and taking care, they could actually still be having a very positive mental health experience. You can see in the top right corner. You can also have someone who has really poor mental health, bottom left-hand corner of the quadrant, that has a very poor mental health, and they might not have a diagnosable condition, but they don't have great conditions or coping skills or environmental, internal and external mental health hygiene. So you don't have to be diagnosed. And Jerry, precisely, coaches are right in there too. And I would argue we need to preface this by saying that everything I'm going to talk about tonight includes coaches. So when we're talking about the athlete, you too are susceptible to this. You too deserve this support. You too need this self-awareness. You too need these resources. So I think even more so, because if we can support those coaches that are holding up and building up the systems, they're going to be better able to manage the programs and help their own athletes. So putting on our own air mask ahead of time, in order to take care of others. I like, and I have used in the past, and I still use the term mental toughness. I like to use this slide though when I'm having this early conversation with athletes and coaches though. This concept of mental toughness is spoken a lot, and it's a great way of phrasing it essentially and trying to build that resiliency, but it can also lead sometimes to stigma with athletes as well. And I prefer the term, what if we thought about using terms like being more flexible? So instead of thinking, well, if I'm mentally tough, if I'm not mentally tough, what am I? I must be mentally weak. And it almost gives it a value. It's like a value statement. So in this case, it's more like, there are days where you're feeling really mentally tough and it's all there. And there's days when you're going to need a little more flex because you're having a little more challenge. And it doesn't make it isn't as stigmatizing as language. So one thing to think about, and you may not want to just strike mental toughness from your vocabulary, but maybe you want to add mental flexibility. If we can meet somewhere in the middle, I think that would be cool. Another question I have for you too. So this concept of checking in first and making sure that, you're getting ready to enter a new phase in the training cycle, or you've got a tough workout coming up. You, the coach, know it, or maybe the athlete knows it, or it's just been a really tough week, or not, and you have no idea really where your athletes are at. A lot of coaches have all kinds of tools where they're monitoring their athletes, and they're filling it out in the morning, or they might use an app. But if the mental health piece isn't necessarily as broken down, it might only be, how's your mood, and do happy face, sad face. It might be really simplistic. If you want to do a more comprehensive mental health check-in, there are some ways to do so. I'm wondering how you check in right now. If anybody wants to put in the chat room, daily assessment. Okay, so some of you have sort of some daily assessments and tools that you use. And these days, especially with COVID, because we have to do reporting of symptoms, I know a lot of athletes are taking temperatures, right? They're like doing the full on, like every day it's in the Google Docs. Like I've got to do this before I can even show up at the gym, right? Daily Q&A. Yeah, exactly. So a lot of coaches are used to doing this and kind of having the physiological and some emotional kind of mental state check-in. I wanted to present to you and all these tools that I'm going to, color code on Locker. Oh, good idea. How everybody's feeling. Love it. So a lot of really cool creative ways to doing it. Sometimes it's just a chat, right? You're just having a little bit of a chat. And so if you have that type of relationship with your athletes and you have the ability to get that kind of hands-on back and real-time feedback, that's really awesome. This is one tool, and every tool that I'm going to show tonight is going to be sent to you tomorrow. So Chris is, I think tomorrow you said, Chris, right? And that's awesome. And I have someone here, ask how the week's going, watch for facial expressions. That's right. So you're really going, you're trying to read the whole, not just the words, you're going with more than that. So this one is kind of pushing some of that agency and that sense of being responsible or having a role in being able to manage their own sort of mental health and awareness, this sheet talks about the comfort zone, the challenge zone, and the stop zone. And someone brought up in our last webinar, brought up a great point that, you know, sometimes the growth for athletes happens when they're in the challenge zone. You can't always be training just in the comfort zone. Part of high performance means we are pushing that limit of comfort, right? Every possible type of discomfort is going to be felt, and that includes mental and emotional. So we've got, it's kind of small, so I don't know if you can read this one, but I'm not going to go into too many details on it, but this will be for you to peruse when I send it on to you. Athletes to explore the signals that they have when they're in that more comfort zone. You know, they feel peaceful, they're more patient, they smile easily, they're grateful to sort of be here. When they get into that challenge zone, there might be some other signals like easily frustrated, they get a little quieter, have some troubles focusing, they might require more frequent deliberate breaks. And then the stop zone is really lashing out, insomnia, trouble sleeping, having trouble completing basic tasks. So daily functioning is not happening. That's a stop zone, and that's sort of where whoa, okay, I got to do something different here. Not necessarily in challenge zone. That's a bit of a, you know, it's an amber, and it could be that that's really where they've got to be in that moment, but they're aware, I got to take care that I don't get into the stop zone. So it's just a way for them to give these feelings and these states a vocabulary and for them to be more aware of them. So something that you might be able to use with your athletes moving forward to think about that. Building flex into that toolkit. We do that. Now they are a little more in charge. They can think about it. Oh, John has a quote in here. Sometimes they don't give indication. Exactly. Suddenly they're in the stop zone. Like, so you didn't even know, right? You didn't even know they were in amber. And so many things are just like all over the place, and they just get overwhelmed, and they show up and they're just like, whoa, I'm in red zone. And you know what? Sometimes, exactly, stoic athletes, they are so used to keeping it inside and managing and just dealing, you know, in some way. And then before they even know it, they don't even know that it's upon them, it's red zone. There are times in our yearly training plans that we have built in that we know are going to be red zone times, right? Heavy loading phases, pre-competition phases, where they have a lot of intensity. We're trying to build in recovery, but it's going to be really challenging based on travel and all kinds of things. So this is a really great year to educate them on these zones, get them thinking about and brainstorming, even doing a team brainstorm on what do you think would be the best way to do check-in with yourself? How are we going to change the vocabulary? Can we start using the stoplight analogy? Is that, would that be useful to you? And where we anticipate in the YTP, this is going to be the red zone. What are we going to build in to help prevent some of the stop zone happening like on a daily basis? Is there a way that we can kind of keep you in amber and talk about that? So this just gives you a vocabulary. And for your athletes that are visual learners or really like to have these little mnemonic devices that remind them of something, stoplight's so easy. And these colors are so easy. So I find athletes really like it. So he gives a great comment here. So reminding them where you can escape, it's your sanctuary, your safe place, and work on the craft. You are in control. That's right. So giving them some tools to feel like they have some agency. And, opening up that conversation that it's okay. Here are some of the stressors that I've been getting feedback for, and some of these were brought up in the feedback tool. They're feeling the pressure to succeed, right? High performance athletes, that's how they're wired. That's how we build it. They're uncertain over their sport pathway because of COVID. They're uncertain about meeting expectations. They're worrying, am I behind my competitors? Like, how do I know where everybody's at right now? Am I going to come out the end of this behind or ahead or maintenance? How do I even know? How am I going to get that feedback from my coach? A lot of them get a lot of anxiety waiting for getting feedback from you, the coaches. Team selections. Will I be able to maintain my carding status, my support, my selection, my ranking, all these things? Conflict, personal relationships, managing injuries or illness. And then if they already had conditions, mental health conditions perhaps, COVID-19 has definitely exacerbated some of them. And that was some of the feedback, as well as some concerns over athletes being able to manage some of these stressors as well. So these are really important that we talk about and help your athletes become more aware of. If we think about this same continuum, we've got the colors in here. On the mental health front, we've got the healthy, sort of normal functioning phase. We've got, think of this similar as we would to any other form of injury. We've got reacting, so common and reversible distress that you would feel in the daily wear and tear of training and that discomfort that you get, and it would revert back to green once we recover. You get into injury zone though, when you might have significant functional impairment. So now it's like, I'm not bouncing back the same way that I do. And now I've got 2-3 days they're like this, or all week, or I feel like I'm really stepping backward and I'm just stuck in this orange zone. And once we're in illness mode, it is even more pronounced, severe, and long lasting. And this is where we might need an intervention. We might need some therapeutic interventions. We might need some medications. We might need full-on rest and recovery and coping skills and strategies. So think of it as any other injury or illness, and this is how we treat it, and try to basically take away some of that stigma and the unknown. The injured or ill athlete, though, when we're in that orange and red zone, these are some of the, and you'll see in some of the sheets that I send you, and if you develop a referral network, they can help you when you suspect they might be in this zone, so you can see some of the symptoms that you might see here, the low or high mood that lasts, the hopelessness, certainly any self-harm. We're going to talk about emergency responses and what that might look like at the end of tonight's chat. But these are just some of the things that you might see and experience in that orange or red zone. And why don't the athletes let us know? So they might be in the red zone for a really long time, or being kind of in denial of the red zone. And some of the reasons that they don't share with us, these were the common ones that we found in many studies through the CCMHS and other university studies. And these were what were brought up for high performance sport. So fear of losing their position or their status, emphasis on the toughness, or someone mentioned in here very astutely, the stoic athlete, right? Emphasis on being mentally tough versus flexibility. Previous bad experiences seeking support. So maybe it wasn't with you, it was with a previous coach, or even outside of sport, through school or something else, or even within their own family. There's a lot of stigma. Stigma being the next one about mental illness. And even some of the leadership that might be around them might increase that stigma depending on the type of language and their overall approach to it. And lack of peers who might be open about their challenges too. So who do or don't have sort of a positive approach, can-do approach. Here's some of the things that you can do as a coach. So take a look at this list here and think about some of the ways that potentially you could move forward and make some of these changes. So number one would be, maybe we have some kind of mental health action plan. That might include some education for athletes. It might mean including more awareness tools. It might be having some maybe guest speaker come in. It might be having a referral network. It might be having a peer support thing where you've got some older, more experienced athletes that you take aside, that you really trust their judgment, and they have very open and helpful attitude, positive attitude about this, and talking about having some peer athlete support as well. Displaying resources, links to websites, all of this. Normalizing just the chatting about it, and that could be talking about your own mental health too, and that seeking help is considered a positive move by you. This is so when I end up finally getting to meet some of the athletes that come and get their referrals to me, it was so often the coach that would unlock the door. The athlete felt safe to tell their coach. The athlete felt safe to have the coach approach them, and then opens up the floodgates. I think I need a little bit more support, and you have such a positive role in that. And knowing how they respond, getting to know them individually, and I'm sure that's what you're already doing, but also knowing your limits when you've kind of reached all that you feel that you can do, and knowing when to connect them with more help. So hopefully something in here looks like this could be, a couple of things that you might want to take action on while we've got the opportunity to take a really close look at what we're doing in our programs while COVID has, caused some real adaptations in what we're all doing. If they do open up, it's so important for them to feel heard, all these things on here. So making sure we take our time to know what they're really saying and how severe, or perhaps normalizing, if this does seem like it might be in more of a typical zone, asking questions just to make sure you fully understand the situation, and then triage that. So whether it's you're going to a peer, you're going to, depending if they're a minor or an adult, you might go to a parent, connecting them to resources for help and support, mental health professional, whatever that looks like. So knowing what to do if they do open up is a really important piece as well. And then maybe with the in-house skill building, it's like for the stuff that could be just worked on within house, so we don't have to refer out. We're talking about some of that everyday sort of wear and tear, mental wear and tear that goes on, starting with self-awareness, having vocabulary. So, I'm freaking out. Well, freaking out, you're actually experiencing a lot of stress. We're all feeling stress, anxieties. This is what it feels like. And just giving that a vocabulary, teaching them self-regulation tools to cope, building in self-compassion. Athletes are notoriously not self-compassionate. A lot of them are really tough on themselves. So this is a really important thing to introduce. The concept of self-compassion is a big one. One team brainstorm activity that some teams have been doing these days is trying to look at the overall impacts of COVID have had such limitations. Could we expand the conversation that we have about these limitations, and instead of seeing them as limits, seeing them as opportunities? And this can really help with mental health as well, because what it does is it means that they are more drawn into the concept of, it's about me mastering my sport at this point. I can't necessarily measure up or measure myself against others because some of my competitions have been limited recently. So what I'm going to do is have a chance to look at mastery over my ego. And I might just plain have to accept that some of the things that are going on right now are beyond my control, but I can adapt by really maximizing, and you coaches are doing that tonight. You're maximizing this opportunity to work on your professional development, given some of the other expectations. So could we do this for athletes as well? And I found this has had a very therapeutic effect on a lot of athletes that are looking for something that they can control, something that they can feel like they're productively adapting towards. So that's one way to approach it, a mastery mindset. We know that these COVID, and some of these will look maybe familiar to you, 4 reasons we're viewing any situation as particularly stressful are usually some variation on these 4 conditions. So a lack of control, and therefore we're stressed. A threat to our ego somehow, like we're being evaluated, for example. Something is unpredictable, or something is brand new and we've never seen this before. These are 4 really common impacts in sport. And outside of sport for that matter. And COVID pretty much checks a lot of it, other than maybe the threat to the ego. COVID not so much, but in terms of lack of control, unpredictability, and novelty, 3 out of 4, check, check, check. So everybody's feeling it and everybody's reacting differently. So what's interesting is some of the athletes are really thriving right now, and so are some coaches, because they have different stress thresholds, or the things that they like or don't like about daily functioning or routine are really different. One tool though, that a lot of my athletes, regardless of their personality, seem to respond really well to right now is using mindfulness. You don't need to be an Eastern meditation guru to practice mindfulness, but it is something that you might want to look into yourself as a coach. And many of my coaches will resist me whenever I tell them, I'm like, you need to chill. You need to find your chill gear. Like, it is, who here has trouble finding their chill gear as a coach? Come on, in the chat box. Maybe you don't want to admit that, but and some coaches are just check. Some coaches, they're just always thinking. Their busy brain is always going. They're always evaluating and doing analysis, and they're thinkers, right? They're thinkers and they're doers, and that's why you're coaches. So with mindfulness, it just means you're paying attention to this present moment right now and just really truly being in this moment. You're not judging it. You're just kind of accepting. It's like that Zen phrase we've all heard, it is what it is. It is what it is. This is what COVID is, one big it is what it is right now, right? So we're trying to not judge. We're trying to accept. And we're trying to catch ourselves if we find ourselves getting overly negative because we're seeing yet another restriction, from our public health office or something, or one more thing is canceled, one more thing is postponed. Pause, identify how we're feeling or thinking, and deciding we're just going to be in this moment and we're going to figure out how we're going to move on. And maybe then we're going to check into something that we can control. So the wise mind is one exercise, and I'm going to pass this on to you, that we can introduce to our athletes and we can do as ourselves as coaches, is simply acknowledge that we have an emotional mind or side to our brain and a reasonable logical mind, and the wise mind somewhere in the middle. So it doesn't discount both. It's actually kind of aware of both, but it's acting on a more taking pause and present-centered action or decision based on a combination of what our emotions are telling us and what our more reasonable or practical mind is telling us. So this is a great exercise I'll give to athletes to monitor themselves during the day, or just for fun, catch themselves being an emotional mind. That's usually pretty easy. That's like when they're, I don't know, they're in the grocery store lineup and they're grabbing that chocolate bar. That's right at the, it's the impulse buy, that they're hungry and or they're emotionally wanting that chocolate. They know it might not make reasonable sense because I'm about to go have dinner, but emotional mind is, something that a lot of them will check with. A reasonable mind, if they're students, while they're studying and while they're doing something really cognitive and more detached from emotion, that might be easy. But athletes often find themselves in a bit of both, especially if they're in pain or they're pushing through thresholds. So it's like, how do I look at this in an analytical way? And also, how do I acknowledge my feelings? And so Wise Mind is a really good way to help them merge or integrate both. I think that the athletes and coaches that already had a broad range of coping skills are doing better right now in this really tough time. We're all struggling, but there might be some that are struggling a little bit more. And you now have added so many other elements to your job description. So you're also an epidemiology specialist in addition to all the other things that you were before. You might be a social worker, more than you ever were before. You're managing risk by doing your return to sport plans. You're a disinfectant specialist. I mean, it's just like, what the heck? So stuff that's being thrown at us is pretty different. And you're going to need to cope too. So I don't know if anyone recognizes these. Were any of you watching the Winter Games by chance in Sochi or Pyeongchang? Does anyone know who this is? Anyone recognize? Maybe you can tell from the, I don't know if you can really tell from the gear here. It's no, you can't totally tell who it is or what country it is. Nobody knows for sure. Oh, yes, Dylan knows. So Team Finland, that's right. Yes, it was, he is a freestyle coach, this guy, and he was a knitter. And he just was using knitting, and knitting is almost like an instant mindfulness exercise because you're very much just in that moment, knit, purl, and he found himself really being able to, like it said here, knitting a little square. His name was Koskinen. And then we'll join them together. And so in the first games, it was more of a solitary pursuit, but so many people saw it and thought, what a brilliant idea, that over half of the 102 person Finnish team were knitting by 2018. So it went from 2014, you got one coach, he goes viral. And next thing you know, you've got half of the team is knitting for the Finnish president. It was a baby or a grandchild or something, and they knitted a massive Afghan. They put it all together by the ends of the games. And this actually is a couple of athletes that did a little press conference on Valentine's Day on how to knit. So it just became team never went cold. Exactly. It's like built in. It was like, it's all about staying warm and staying engaged. But what a genius. It's funny. He said, it's a nice Finnish things. And it meant no unnecessary chit chat is needed. Any of you who have Finnish friends know exactly what that Yes, very matter of fact. No unnecessary chit chat. That's right. So you know what? Perfect activity. So if this fits your personality, do it. Knitting might not be it. They might have other mental skills you'll want them to learn. So here are some of the list. If you have a mental performance consultant that you know or could work with, or you yourself have taken some and you administer and build some mental skills as well. These are some of the areas that you can work on with them, and I'll give you some worksheets in that area too. And on the Canadian Centre for Mental Health and Sport, if you just sort of Google CCMHS, I'm going to send you this worksheet as well. It's got several sheets. This is where athletes can actually develop their own sort of self-care plan, particularly while COVID is going on right now. So in here, it's got like your go-to practices for my mind, my body, emotions, social, school, and sport. Their top 3 coping strategies, what's helpful in a crisis, what do I want to avoid, and who's my go-to person. And every athlete fills that out. And so they have it. So we know there's everyday functioning, everyday prevention, and just, kind of just incorporating this into my daily self-care. But I also have some my own little self-care emergency tree for the crisis. And I'm probably going to want to inform my coach too. Like these might be some things that you want to build into that mental health plan as a program. So this is a way to, again, destigmatize, and I'll give you that info. Integrated mental skills, overall health, building it into the program. This is an example of a worksheet that I use. I have a number of tools that I usually start with when I'm just starting to work with athletes heading into the competitive pathway. I like to work with things like technical cues, get them used to these words and what that might mean, what their self-talk is. I definitely want to introduce mindfulness. I like using that, the power of breathing, awareness of body language, and things like mental rehearsal. So all of you coach different disciplines, you have different sort of go-tos on the mental skills. It could be you want to engage with a mental performance consultant to help you do that. It could be that you want to take more coach education to get some more resources to do that on your own. Whatever that is, I can certainly help provide Chris with some ideas on how to get you some of the support. I do have some great mindfulness resources, Chris, and I'd be happy to share. There's some really great websites too that can take you through, and apps. There's cool apps.
I've booked in, or I'm a subscriber to what's it called, Headspace. And
Headspace, yeah, that's my favorite one.
It's a little expensive, but it's so worth it. It's
yeah,
pretty great, and you can take it anywhere, and you can use it for anything. I mean, they have a lot of sport-specific stuff in there, which is great.
it's awesome. Yeah, so if they want it, one that you can pay for, it's great. I have a few other I can recommend as well. There's an Australian one that is free. It's called Smiling Mind, and it's free. There's some American ones that are also free, and there's one by and Anxiety BC has one, and I can't remember what it's called off the top of my head. I used to have all of them on my phone, but it's taking up too much memory. It's taking up too much battery.
John mentioned calm.com. Looks like he wrote that.
Oh yeah, calm.com is another one. Yeah, I've seen that. And some of them provide like visual, and some are not just visual, but they have like auditory, like really cool like videos and sounds and stuff like that.
Yeah, great.
So then we get into these top sort of mental health challenges in high performance sport. These were some of the ones that kind of have come through a lot in the literature, in the NCAA, in youth sports, through the Canadian Sport Institutes, and for us, like at Pacific Sport and the Hub where we work, we focus in these 4 areas because they show up the most. And so tonight I thought we would just give you a little bit of a sneak peek into anxiety. I'm going to be giving you info sheets on all of these. Breathing, and yeah, breathing for sure. Breathing is like so key that they see that as a nice free drug, basically. Breathing is probably the best sedative that you can get, and is best activation technique as well. So it's like so multi-purpose and very underrated. Yes. So we've got anxiety, depression, mood disorders, substance use or misuse, and we're going to focus next month on eating and exercise disorders. We're going to actually deep dive into number 4. So for tonight, with the anxiety piece, again, earlier I talked a little bit about, let's get the vocabulary going, because they might use things like worried, nervous, fearful. Anxiety can be all of those things or one of those things, and in varying degrees. And to some degree, it's common, right? And it can be helpful. It's there for a survival reason. But it also can become completely unmanageable. And it's for us to know when it is unmanageable, that's when we need to start thinking about supplying our athletes with some extra tools. What does Nigel have here? Heard recently, zooming out your vision's actually quicker pathway to calm the breathing. That is such a cool idea. I got to look into that. So zooming out your vision. Let me check that out. Good note. They're always making new advances in neuroscience. It's really hard to keep up. But that's the exciting part. It's supposed to keep changing, right? That's the beauty of science. It's the beauty of the performance realm too, is everybody's looking for something that's more efficient and effective. So different types of anxiety or ways that it can manifest where they start to really get problematic are people that have generalized anxiety. They might develop into panic disorders, OCD, or phobias. And I'm going to be giving you a worksheet that talks a bit more about this, what some of those signs might look like, some of the ways that we can or get them help, etc. And we'll talk about that soon. But these would be some of the more problematic realms. This is what the info, it's a 2-pager, and it will have a case illustration, signs and symptoms, resources and support, and why athletes are at a higher risk. And if there's something in particular on these sheets that you'd like to know more about, you can just let Chris know or contact me directly. Some of you did that following the last webinar, so I'm happy to help and support in between webinars too. For non-urgent support, you can check out, if you're in BC, SportMed BC you can just go on the, what have we got in there? Nigel has the tool. Is that where you found it, Nigel, about the zooming out thing? And video calls all the time. Cool. And it's a podcast. Awesome. That's cool. There's another one as well, Chris, you might remember, that I give as, it's a great podcast on neuroscience and psychomotor learning. Do you remember that one in my course? I don't know if you remember. It's
No,
been
I
a
feel
while
bad.
now.
Yeah, no, my memory sucks.
Oh man, what the heck? I should know this though. I'm still giving this out. Why do I not remember this? Anyway, some other really cool, like sort of neuroscience-based ways to also enhance learning. So the skill acquisition, I'll have to go, something in action podcast. Anyway, I'll send that to you once I figure it out. Then we've got on SportMed BC, so you can see the Sports Psychology Association. We've actually got all our members all across Canada in every province and what those certifications are. So whether they're a counselor, licensed psychologist, or mental performance consultant, your local Canadian Mental Health Association branch may also be able to give you some supports and tell you where you can go. If your athletes are on campus, they likely have a university health center where there might be some mental health support. Same goes for high school students too. And no matter where they are in Canada, they can access virtually a practitioner through the Canadian Centre for Mental Health and Sport. And so that's a virtual clinic available in each province, and they have an intake specialist who would take in that athlete. You can refer your athlete there. They don't need a clinical referral, and they will do the triage or the intake with our intake service provider there. So that's some of the where you can get some free resources, and the services, they have to pay for service, but if they have insurance, we can also go through insurance providers as well. Perception in action. Thank you, Sahib. Excellent. See, this is why we want I'm loving how much of the chat window. Everyone, we've broken the ice. This is good. It's so much better than last month. Awesome. Emergency support. So, for some of those that we talked about earlier, I keep pointing up as though my PowerPoint is up. When we talked earlier about some of those really the red zone. So the injured and ill categories where they're at immediate risk. That's where we're really talking about we're talking about emergency crisis response there. So a local emergency department, 911, if we're really thinking there's an imminent threat. For students, they have their emergency response on campus as well, which is really great. So get acquainted with that if you are affiliated as your club or working with the university response. And for athletes that are supported through the Sport Institute, they have their athlete services as well. So seeing what they recommend, and there might be particular places or ways that they want to triage that if they are a carded athlete as well. So just know your emergency response. And so this is sort of the test drive. This is, now we're getting to the, before we delve into maybe a few more questions, these are some of the actions that I hope, maybe you could think about doing following this webinar. So creating that mental health action plan. What does that look like? What could be some tools that I haven't yet maybe thought about providing my athlete with? What are some tools I actually don't use on myself? What are some ways that I can break the ice and bust open some of that stigma? Maybe I start throwing in there, having normalizing conversations with them about doing that mental health check-in. Thinking about the opportunity to reduce the pressure valve a bit for my athletes. We're all feeling anxious. We're all feeling uncertainty right now. We all kind of have to go from that accept and adapt slide. Right? What do we all need to accept? Could we move more during this phase that we're in right now, as some of us move into indoor, into more of this mastery piece? What are be some areas that my athlete can move into mastery? It could be some of their preparation, their warm-up has always been unpredictable and not very regimented or reliable, and they haven't been very committed to it. Is it a dynamic stretching regime? Is it their sleep hygiene? Is it their mental skills building? Is it dietary concerns? Is it hydration? So many things. Mental skills building, digital tools. I'm so excited that a few people brought that up tonight, and Chris prompted that. So, check out Headspace, check out some of these really great apps, ask around, see what everybody else is using or something that might be useful. Maybe it's assembling a referral network. So if this should happen, and if I do worry about this athlete or I have some particular recurring issues, who would I be able to contact in my community, on campus, wherever that is? And then how could I apply some of these same supports to myself? How do I put that, mask on myself first in order to be able to give myself the same duty of care as I'm giving as an amazing coach to my athletes, right? We've got to take care of ourselves too. So all those same things apply. The next session, we're going, and Tara says here, we're focusing on strength and conditioning, improve sport-specific performance. Exactly. So you found your spot, your mastery spot, right? So finding that sweet spot, reducing some of that uncertainty of those 4 areas that cause us stress, right? The novelty, the lack of predictability, the lack of control. Well, being able to redirect our energies are going to actually really reduce a lot of that anxiety for many of our athletes. It won't solve everything, but I think it will definitely be a positive distraction, right? A place to put our energy. And one area that we are seeing a very significant rise in, certainly some triggers for athletes that already had underlying issues with body image or eating or exercise disorders, or somewhere on that spectrum, because it is a spectrum of disordered eating behaviors all the way through to the illness of a full-blown diagnosable eating disorder or exercise disorder. So we're going to focus on that maybe in a little bit more detail about the prevention, spotting it, what we can do about our sport culture to help not exacerbate some of these pieces, and what do we do if we spot it, we suspect it, and we really want to follow through on that duty of care for our athletes. So that is what we've decided we're going to focus on next time. Oh, and nice, Athletics Canada is doing a coaching self-care. Oh, great. So that fits perfectly into this. So now, talking about the mental health, giving the tools to others, and then taking care of yourselves is the perfect next step. So back here, next slide, some of the part of that mental health action plan is, what do I need to pick? What do I need to fit in for myself? I'm wondering if they're going to do the puzzle like the Coaching Association of Canada has a really great, Andy Van Nuytgem had and Dave Hill had designed, called it the Coaching Self-Care Puzzle or something like that. And they had all these different puzzle pieces. If any of you have logged in or seen that presentation before, I'm not sure if athletics is using that model, but there's a lot of really great models out there for coach self-care. So I really hope as many of you as possible log into that. Does anyone have any additional questions or specific things that they would like resources for that I could actually upload into that Google Drive that I'm going to give you the access to tomorrow? Anyone think of something we didn't?
And
Don't
feel free to
don't,
jump off of mute if you want to as well. We can make this a bit more of a dialogue.
yeah, that would be awesome. I know Donna so well. When I worked at Coaching Association, Donna was my athletics link in working, as I worked with Athletics Canada to help them approve their competition development program. And Donna was the
Right?
coach ed, yeah, coach education. And this was an area of huge passion for Donna.
Yeah, so I haven't, I talked to her a bit about, I don't know the full details of her session, but we're going to talk like next week, I guess, and just kind of go over the details and stuff. But yeah, like she's presented on this before when we did the conference at NACAC. She kind of did a bit of a talk on it too. So, but I think, yeah, it's a very natural kind of next step. And she likes to tell the sort of story of how when she talks to coaches about stuff and like recovery and like everything, and then and they what do you get your athletes to do to recover, and then she says like, well, what do you do to recover? And the coaches are all like
I know. Well, it's funny because when I did this with I did it with Alpine Canada, and they were all found no problem building in that stoplight exercise in their YTPs, like where they could identify right where, oh yeah, this is where the athletes always, oh yeah, here's where we have like heavy duty, this is like verge of burnout, oh yeah, here's my danger zone, red zone. And I'm like, okay, and what about you? And they're like, oh yeah, I'm also in the red zone right over there, or actually their red zone was even bigger because they are preparing for all these things so far in advance of the athletes even thinking about it, because they're already having to think about team selections and travel plans and all these other things.
Yeah,
and
coaches don't taper.
No, there's no tapering, right? It's just you're basically nonstop red sometimes. So no, it's really awesome. I'm feeling totally, coach burnout is a thing. It's real. It's as real as the athlete burnout. Just like there's volunteer burnout too, right? There's volunteer burnout for all those really valued volunteers that help our clubs to sustain our clubs, and our board members get burnt out. Coaches in particular are very susceptible to it. So I think it's awesome we're starting to talk about ways to how the self-care can fill a really important void in there. So
and I know we've had to shift things as well. I know, like on a personal level, I'm not the coach, but our routines all changed with COVID. So instead of my normal walk to the bus and walk to work, I was getting an extra couple K a day, and that time of reflection. Now I walk 2 feet from my kitchen, right? And that's just not healthy. So I'm trying to get out in the morning and go for that walk. And that's still to kind of stimulate myself in the day to get that period of reflection. So we're having to adapt that way as well.
Definitely. Yeah. Figuring out, okay, so if this left, what am I replacing it with? Right. And yeah, I think that's a really, really big piece. It's another reason why for the athletes with the eating and exercise disorders, this is becoming such a source of stress for them, particularly when they were in lockdown. That was really a major issue, and we saw a real spike in distress.
So he put an interesting term in there, Sean, and I wonder if it's something to talk about this idea of coach burnout. I mean, like, should that even be a thing? Like, how do coaches, do the self-care to ensure that doesn't happen? Like, and what could that look like? What are some strategies?
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think that, it's tough because like burnout, and it's interesting because athletes, when we talk burnout, I just did a webinar on burnout a couple of weeks ago, and it's predominantly a psychologically based, or that's where it lives anyway, is in psychological literature. For athletes, we have our own sport burnout, and we only talk about athletes because there's such a psychological component to it. The coaches we tend to attach to workplace burnout, and actually the original burnout that was studied in the 1970s were volunteers working at a free drug clinic in New York City. And so they were working with street people that had major addiction issues, working round the clock, right? And they were burning out. And these researchers were like, what is going, what do we call this? Is it, what are we going to call it? And so they started calling it burnout. And that's where it took on all of these terms. And now it's being applied to a wide variety of settings. And I think it's workplace burnout, what it is. And what have we got, Dylan, in here? Working with a university, fill out daily assessment, shifts in norms recently, the benefit of getting them to do a mental assessment. Yeah, this is, again, part of the challenge, this daily stuff, adding that tipping point for some of the athletes, it is a big challenge for sure. For some of them, though, it's filling a really valuable research piece and also a really valuable self-awareness piece. So that where it becomes a bit of a challenge deciding which is which. And I think personality has a lot to do with it. Or remember, we talked about knowing your athletes and knowing their stress thresholds. So some of them have a really high threshold, some of them have a really low threshold. Adding just one more thing is the drop of water that overflows the bucket. And then others, they're feeling it. Jerry says, makes it a little bit less likely to reach a burnout when you keep in mind we're just playing a game. Yeah, putting it in perspective is a big one, Jerry. That's why, I like this concept of shifting from all about ego to just mastery. Like we're so fortunate that we get to do this thing that we love, and trying to see it that way. I mean, it sounds all great when we're in practical mind, right? But emotional mind is saying, this is my life, this is my life. How, that's massive effect. So finding the wise mind sweet spot in the middle, I think, is taking a bit of both. I like that, Jerry, though. Yeah, no one saying an operate, exact perspective. It's about perspective. So when I brainstormed this with one of our programs here in the Central Okanagan, that was what really came clear, is that a lot of the athletes had a new appreciation of just where they fit, I guess, into looking at how hard some sectors have been hit to like a life-threatening level versus, a lot of disappointment, but I'm still here and I can still be with my family. I can still finish my studies, all these things. So yeah, it's really important to bring that perspective. And it doesn't discount what we're feeling, but I think it does help to place us a little bit in where we might fit in a global distress scale. So all really good points. And be thinking, if you're planning on attending that session next month, if there are particular questions that you might have, maybe if I can just prompt them right now, Chris, a little bit, to get feedback again. If there are particular, because all of you are really different, you have different issues when it comes to the body image piece, because the different types of bodies that present in your particular discipline are different, and all of your disciplines and event groups are different. So if there are some things that in particular you'd like me to address, I'd love to know in advance, because then I can come prepared. Let's see, and Mavis said, open about your anxiety and conversations, things like this webinar. That's so awesome. That, because it is just such an empowering thing, I think, when we serve truly as the role modeling effect for our athletes. That has made all the difference. It's high profile athletes and coaches normalizing the conversation. And even though I'm a practitioner, I'm not supposed to do that in my sessions with my athletes, but if I'm doing like an education seminar, I will let them know elements in my own biography where I had to work with it too, and I struggled with it too. And that just helps open the door for so much really great conversation, because they know that I get it. I'm not just a practitioner, I get it, I lived it, right? They love it when you act human. They already, if you've got a great rapport with them and they respect your technical, your tactical strategic mind and all those great things you bring, if you can just open the door a little bit, and feel solid enough to be that vulnerable moment with them, I think it has so much value for the destigmatizing is so critical. And I am so grateful to the coaches that have really helped open up our whole line of work in what we do and in support of all of you. So thank you to all of you that are doing that every day. It sure helps my job and our field. Yeah.
I will
So
also just mention that, and I sent an email to most everyone. Hopefully, you all got that email. Is that with Shauna's next presentation, it's actually being wrapped up into what we're calling our Performance Summit. And if you wish to actually take part of that whole Performance Summit, I can cancel your registration for this single session, and you can go and register part of the larger summit, and that way you can also get access to this seminar. But if you just want to take Shauna's session as itself next time, that's fine too, and just you can stay registered, and I'll send you the link. No problem there.
nice. That's awesome. Oh, and Jerry struggles with taking himself serious. I can't do anything about that, Jerry. That's not solvable. Okay. That's just is what it is, Jerry. I don't know. Just gonna have to cope with that on your own. And then Jessica has a question here too. Athlete anxiety levels will increase having to adapt, reintroduce. Yes. Yeah, I actually do. I think anytime now that we're going through these phases and we've never really done this before, and we've never had these kinds of restrictions, this type of interruption and strange adaptation made, and they're already feeling heightened levels of anxiety, having any kind of increase now and these more normal, feeling a little less normal, I think we're naturally, you can expect a bit of a spike, and you can expect more of the jitters. And maybe now would be a really good time to talk about, demystify, destigmatize this idea of what anxiety look like, what typical anxiety might look like, and you might be getting more of it. And here's what it might look and feel like. But if it doesn't, and it doesn't come down and get to where your daily functioning is so impaired, then we can look into getting some extra support. But it's okay, we're going to go through this together and kind of preemptively talk about it, especially if you suspect some of your athletes already. You kind of know in the back of your mind which ones are going to struggle the most. You might want to, be preemptive about that potentially. And then Tara's got athletes who are training focused and others who are competent. Exactly. We always have that that mix, right? On every given squad, you've got the different types of athletes. So yeah, the daily training group, they'll struggle more. That's right. As you start to transition back to something else, because some of my athletes have, like the ones that are more introverted or the ones that are more training focused, more intrinsic, more mastery oriented anyway, they're loving right now. They're like, I don't need to compete. I'm just going to just keep on running. I'm just going to run for the hills. I just don't want to compete against anybody. And now's a really good excuse for me to not have to. But eventually they're going to have to test themselves, and they're going to struggle again. So then competition goal. Yeah, exactly. And some it's just like, okay, this constant training against myself. I'm sick of mastery. It's like, hit me against, I'll race my neighbor's 6-year-old kid. Like, I'll do everything. Like, I literally will beat that child. Like, I will, yeah, exactly. Yeah, so it's so funny to see how they're all reacting. Oh, and that's another thing. Use humor. Humor. I forgot to think of the other buffers. So one is not taking yourself too seriously. There, you should be okay. Using humor. Another really big one, and another one we've already mentioned now, is letting yourself get in the mix. And so when you're all feeling different things together, maybe you start the conversation, because you are the leader. And if you lead, they will follow. It will open the door. It will normalize. And now we can get the tools that we need to cope, right? So that's awesome. You guys are great.
Great. Well, I think unless there's anything else, we're 8:01, so I think we've ran the full hour there. I appreciate the dialogue back and forth with everyone. That's great. And hopefully everyone is keen on this next session. If you have anything specific and you didn't want to bring it up in the chat or on conversation here, you can shoot us an email and we can try to address that specifically for this next session. Otherwise, I will send off all of the materials that Shauna alluded to tonight. And I will also send you a link to this recording so that if you wanted to go back and digest a little bit more, that's always good. I think that's probably it. So anything else from you?
No, just know that if you did want to give some case specific things, I won't be mentioning anything too specific for you to worry if this is going to be awkward for you. I will change the details, and it will be completely confidential. So we'll discuss it as a hypothetical case study. Yeah.
Yeah, so you can either, if you want, you can send that directly to Shauna. If you need her email address, you can, you don't have it, you can ask me and I can send you that. So that way, it doesn't have to come through me.
Sounds good.
Oh, there we go.
That's my social media, but also my email is on my website, so they can just go right through there. Yeah.
There we go. Cool.
Just my name. Yeah. So.
Okay,
Excellent.
guys, everyone, John and Sahid, you guys go to bed. It's way too late for you guys out in Ontario.
Oh, are they way out? Oh, geez. Thanks for staying up, guys.
And everyone else, have a good evening.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Shauna. Appreciate it.
Bye, Chris. Thank you.
Bye-bye.